Welcome to Christmas on Death Row. I'm Charlie.
And I'm Corey.
This week we will be discussing the 1996 holiday album Christmas on Death Row. This is not actually related to prison, which some may think it was possibly, but it's a compilation of artists on Death Row Records in 1996. And they recorded a holiday album. Who knew? I didn't know about this until Corey decided that we were going to cover it. And, well, it's an interesting little album. I will say that's...
It's hard to hold all the tea back. I don't think anybody knew about it, especially in 96. We'll talk about what it went up against, but I don't think many people knew about it. It was pretty much a full first listen for me too, which we very rarely do, or these dives into cool ideas that neither of us have had long walks on the beach with. And yeah.
Yep, that's basically it. Because we have done some hip hop. I don't think we've really gone into much of the Death Row catalog, possibly something to look to in 2025. But we've spent a bit more time on the East Coast when it comes to hip hop of the 90s.
That we had.
Yeah, doing Nas, Fugees, even Tribe Called Quest. But now we're on to the West Coast. And this was the preeminent label, home of Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and Tupac. And so Death Row had made such a big name for themselves in hip hop. They did want to expand, though, actually. They actually were starting to think of being like the Motown of the 90s, which, ambitious. I'll give them points for ambition there, Dre and Suge Knight.
I feel like that Motown of the 90s mentality or even thought process, especially with the stable that they had. I won't say I think. In my opinion, that's more of a delusion of grandeur of Suge Knight. And if you don't know the character that we're speaking about, he was a gangster. He was a gangster. He was the strong arm of Death Row Records, to say the very least. But he thought his crap didn't stink on all levels. As most do at the top. So to think that you could become Motown or even say that out loud, for me, is a delusion of grandeur. Especially from one of the craziest, scariest crews, if for lack of better words, or labels, period. They were some hardcore people
Yeah,
back then.
that they were. This whole Christmas album, though, I think the concept was maybe it'll soften their image a bit. It was not, I'm not sure. The person who claims to take the person who is taking credit for the idea is Daz Dillinger of the Dog Pound, one of the groups who appears on this album. He said, quote, "I saw others were releasing Christmas albums and thought we should too," unquote. And yes, Christmas albums were dime a dozen in the 90s. A lot of people were doing them, some better than others. We've covered a couple of the very best ones of the 90s on this show already. So yeah, they wanted to get their Harry Connick or Mariah on, probably a bit closer to Mariah in the case of Death Row
It,
Records, but okay,
yeah.
that was what they wanted to do. And
Which again, I'll beat this into the ground, was crazy for the random listener, your main populace, to think coming from Death Row, which is what drew me to it when I saw it on the top Christmas album lists and read a bit about it, was that these guys and girls that you are getting a majority of your really, really hardcore West Coast lyrics, period, music, period, coming from, were ready to make a Christmas album. And I'll leave that one there. I'll leave that one there, because there's other things to say about this, inspiring things, in my opinion, to say about this, but we're going to touch them as we go through.
that we will. But so the Dog Pound were the first artists to record a cut for the album. That was late 1995, and the sessions continued throughout the year, but there was a lot going on at Death Row Records both in and out of the studios in 1996. And the most notable of those happened in September of that year when outside, uh, possibly, probably at that point in time, by 1996, the label's biggest moneymaker, biggest star, Tupac, was murdered in Las Vegas. But despite that, they decided to keep going. They decided to keep going. Suge Knight booked sessions in the Bahamas to get his mind off of the loss of Tupac, and they just they just kept going. Kevin Lewis, who was the son of jazz pianist Ramsey Lewis, he got together a band and went to Compass Point Studios to get some of these songs on the record. And he produced most of the album, which we'll discuss his production as we get into the album. One of the artists, Danny Boy, said they were telling the story of what they were going through at the time. I guess you had to be there.
Yeah, that's what I guess that's one of like reading into these interviews with these guys, many of the artists. I guess that's the one inspiring thing that I take from it is because these guys were musicians enough, not taking anything away from their musicianship, but they were musicians enough, they were professionals enough to know that to release a Christmas album was a different thing. It meant a different thing for who you were as a label. There was respect garnered with it. And it is a goal for a lot of artists. So it's something to strive to. We touch a bit of it through this album, but more so, like you were saying, you had to be there. People that are speaking for, if not have lived through these impoverished times, these rough times, never thought that they'd be making an album like this. So to really sit back and take this from a professional angle was pretty cool, coming from these gangster rappers, and the level of tradition that they still chose to keep here is inspiring at the very least for this album. I'm not reaching. I'm not giving benefit of the doubt. I'm trying to put my pros ahead of my cons for lack of foreshadowing.
Yes, that's a good way to look at it. But, well, this album actually had a really big con even before Tupac's murder. Didn't mention this earlier in 1996. Dr. Dre left Death Row Records, and he was the label's main producer. So yeah, he's not involved on this album at all, which is kind of crazy to think they made a Christmas album without Dr. Dre, but that did happen. I mean, you wouldn't think of that, but if you're come on, if you're gonna do a Death Row Christmas album, you gotta have all hands on deck, and that includes Dre. And didn't end up happening. But then flash forward to October of that year, months after Dre left, not long, weeks after Tupac was murdered, Suge Knight ended up going to prison, not for what he's there now for. It was a probation violation. With, and as a result of that, he wasn't in charge of the label by the time this album was going to be released. In fact, Reggie Wright Jr., who was the label's head of security, took over, and I don't want to give Suge Knight too much credit. He's not a good dude, to put it lightly. Yeah, you wouldn't one big thing both him and Phil Spector, who we discussed last week, have in common is they're just bad fucking dudes. There's just not much getting around that. But one thing that he did do that was smart was spread out his releases properly. Um, since the Chronic, every Death Row release had gone platinum by 1996. But Reggie Wright just took a very different approach. He decided to put one album out after another. In November, there were releases from Machiavelli, aka Tupac, under a pseudonym, Snoop Dogg, which was the follow up to Doggy Style, and Death Row's Greatest Hits. So by the time this album came out in early December, there were a big 3 weeks to promote it. Nobody really wanted to promote it because morale at the label was so low. And they were losing their market share. Frankly, with those other releases, this wasn't going to be under many Christmas trees when you had releases from Tupac and Snoop Dogg. And I mean, well, can you blame the consumer? I mean, if I went to the store in 1996, yeah, I think I would have reached for one of those too.
Yeah, it really speaks to the whole house being in disarray. I mean, you got Suge Knight in jail, Tupac's dead. The mission statement is put your head down and let's keep going forward through this turmoil. And the head of security is now running the show, just releasing every single album we got. It speaks to that disarray, and you see that disarray come up here. I didn't even touch on the fact that Dre wasn't there. I mean, no Dre is. I don't even know how to equate it. You're losing your producer pretty much for your whole entire label, and a virtuoso and a genius off your label, and then being like, we're just going to move forward um, as business as usual, which is impossible, as we can see from some of the production on this album, but just from the release schedule period. It's no one is steering the ship correctly here at this point, and that's why this falls into the bargain bin, so to speak, at that point, for your CD stores, for your record stores, is because nobody even is going to grab this. You might grab it on a whim. You might grab it on a I'm a death row diehard. I'm grabbing every CD they just put out, but it wasn't something that was bringing people to the stores, and it wasn't getting radio play. That was one of the hardest ones to find, is what radio play they did get off this. And really, it's just one track, the single, and it was few and far between. It's not like it was a hit on the radio.
No, not at all. And this album made it to 155 on the Billboard 200, which is embarrassing for this label considering the amount of chart-topping albums they had prior to this. That is really embarrassing. It made it to number 30 on R&B hip hop, but yeah, not a great showing. This didn't even go gold. One single was released with a video, and this album really then kind of just got lost to time in many ways. It wasn't even available on streaming like much of the Death Row catalog. It's now gotten back onto streaming thanks to Snoop Dogg reviving the label and getting the catalog back on there. But people wanted the Chronic on streaming. There was not a big clamoring for Christmas on Death Row. But now it is on streaming, and it does beg the question, should this album be reconsidered after being lost in the shuffle so much? I think it's a important question to ask, and definitely an interesting backstory. So, in that regard, I'm glad that we're here to discuss it today, to shed light on something not super well known, really. It's really just maybe a bit, not even much of a cult following this album has, you could say. It's just kind of there.
Yeah, I had to omit the words cult following from getting ready for the podcast today, because I couldn't find a real cult following on this. This is more so a rarity, something
Yeah,
that your average person doesn't even know got made.
yeah, that we do. And we've done a lot of well-known albums, but every once in a while you gotta do a rarity. So with that being said, I'm ready to do what we do here and go track by track and discuss the contents of Christmas on Death Row.
Let's get at it.
So the album begins with the lead single, which is Santa Claus Goes Straight to the Ghetto. The lead artist on this is Snoop Dogg. Makes sense. Label's biggest star at this point now that you don't have Tupac anymore. And it features Das from the Dog Pound, Trey D, Bad Az, and Nate Dogg singing the hook, best known at this point for Regulate. So lot going on here. We have an interpolation of Do Your Thing by Isaac Hayes. I mean, I get the idea of doing a posse cut, but it's Snoop Dogg and Nate Dogg. You really, the rest of it's kind of superfluous when you have those two heavy hitters there, frankly. They're going to come in and kind of steal the show, especially Snoop Dogg. And I think that Snoop showcases his trademark humor on this song, much like he Does to this day. I appreciate it in that regard. This charted at 75 on the R&B hip hop airplay charts. So yeah, not much airplay. Corey wasn't kidding when
Yeah.
I say not much airplay. It appeared in the movie Friday After Next from 2002, which I have not seen. So yeah, I'd never heard this song before. I mean, it's cool, I guess. Can't go wrong with Snoop.
Well, that's one thing we do see in this lead track here. It's a Snoop Dogg track. That's the way, it's a crew track, but that's the way it's on the album. We get that genius, lyricist. We get that genius in pentameter here. He incorporates pieces of popular Christmas tradition and sprinkles it in there, and it works. I mean, Nate Dogg singing the hook, that at this time that was insanely crucial, but more so, like, even as first time listener outside of that period, it fits. This song is crisp. It's a tad long for me, even with everybody in it. I don't mind everybody in it as much. For me, this is their version of a Phil Spector wall of sound type of deal on a Christmas album. Getting everybody in on the first track in a great way, in a featured way. But I won't even say but. For right now, it's a great opener and it's super polished. It sounds like a Dre track almost, and they've still got me here at Santa Claus Goes Straight to the Ghetto. Not a Christmas classic, but it really does its job without being a parody. And I think that's huge for a lot of the stuff that works on this album. Is this wasn't a parody album. This wasn't a comedy album. Yes, we get that dark comedy that the West Coast was known for in little snippets and spoken stuff, but for the most part, they really stick outside of the comedic value of anything inside of this, which I think is huge. If it came off as a parody, I feel like it would be spat upon by everybody, and not taken seriously at all. And I think it really, I hope, but I really do think that they are trying to take themselves very seriously with this Christmas album, and it shows on this first track.
Yeah, I have to say, and I think that's a bit of a disconnect I think you could have with a newer generation hearing this. If you're familiar with Snoop Dogg as he is now, he was
Yeah.
not the same in 1996. Now he's a whole TV personality. He's Snoop Dogg's gonna appear at the Olympics and on The Voice. But that is not the Snoop Dogg of 1996. So that might be a bit of a disconnect though for some people, considering
Yeah,
how
I can
beloved
see
he
it.
is.
I can see it. If anything, for those people, I say just take a trip back in time.
Yeah.
If you're not going to put on Doggy Style or The Dog Father, or figure out what he used to be about at a young age, it's a good look. It's a good
Yeah.
quick look during the Christmas season.
Yeah. But it's also kind of a foreshadowing that I don't think they were predicting at the time, but is this where the transition begins? I don't know. But yeah, it's actually Snoop Dogg's only track on the album, unfortunately. That make of that what you will going forward. That's all I'm gonna say.
Make of it what you will, but pin it, because it's a huge thing for me on this album.
It's
Is I'll just say it now: the lack of superstar power, and not so much for someone that is of a new generation, but if you were to look back and be like, okay, let's look at death row power players, you've got some here, but you don't have the star caliber that another big label would put into a compilation Christmas album like this. That might be a hot tea take for some people, but that's the way I feel as far as their roster here.
I mean, it is true, and admittedly, they did lose one of their biggest and brightest with Tupac.
I heard.
But we have to ask ourselves, Can people rise up? That's really kind of what it is. I mean, I do think there's an argument to be made here. We're showcasing some not as well-known singers, and there's a case to be made for that. The question is, do they make the most of their time? And the first of those we'll be discussing is Danny Boy with track two, the Christmas song, a standard written by Robert Wells and Mel Torme, first performed by Nat King Cole. Shockingly, we haven't covered this song on one of the Christmas albums we've done yet, I don't think.
I was thinking the same thing. We've never done the Christmas song, which is crazy.
It really is. And Danny Boy, I see as a talented singer who just didn't have the best luck at Death Row. He recorded a whole album for them at this time, wasn't released until 2010, after the label in its original form was history. So that says something not great about Death Row, if you ask me. He did get some good hook opportunities. Very young kid, college age at this time. And yeah, good singer. This is a decent 90s version of the song. It's very 90s R&B. That's kind of what the producer here, Kevin Lewis, is going for. I think basically as a version of this song, it works fine.
You got to also remember that they were a gangster rap label. So, the mismanagement of R&B, in my opinion, comes from not knowing how to handle what you have.
Yeah.
And you lost Dre. I'm going to say that over and over and over again. One, if not, I won't say the only, but one of the biggest musical minds you had. Also, a lot of the singers on this album featured are backup singers that are singing hooks for these rap songs. Not Danny Boy here. And you can see that because his vocal performance here is on par with an R&B singer of the times. It's not anything that's going to blow us away, but it also is perfectly set on top of this composition. Now, the composition here is the first time we see the lack of Dre. For me, this is just one of the weakest backing tracks. You can go soft listening R&B all you want, and I'm a jazz musician. I love all types, but there is a lot of holes and a lot of flubs, I will say, in production and in the composition of these backing tracks. And this is just the start of where we go. So it is a cool little version and done very well, very soft and with a lot of love for the original. I will give it that. But as far as the production on this album, we start to see the cracks, so to speak, and it starts here.
Yeah, I was going to say this later, but let's just get out of the way. Kevin Lewis is no baby face when it comes to this
Right.
smooth R&B. Let's just say it
Right.
now.
That's definitely.
It's that simple. There is a right way to do this music, and how much will we get it here? To be determined. The next track is I Wish, though this is a hip hop track, so not smooth R&B. This is by the Dog Pound. This was the first song recorded for the album. It's about how they wish they had love at Christmas. So, I mean, these boys were riding high after the success of their debut the previous year, which went double platinum. Big success. These guys obviously aren't as well known today as Snoop Dogg, but they definitely had a moment. It's very light G-Funk musically. Like, I can tell they're going for a Dre replica sound. And it's a in terms of what we're going to get here, I'm going to say it now. This is as good as it's going to get in terms of replicating G-Funk. It doesn't really get to the Dre level, but it's as close as we're going to get the rest of this, let me tell you.
Yeah, I did some heavy searching trying to see how much of this was Dre stuff that was just there and used, and it's very hard to find because that's the thing about this track and a couple of them here. I convince myself, whether I'm right or wrong, that these are backing tracks for other songs. And then I go trying to find these backing tracks. This is I'm glad you put it that way, because it really is. It's a facsimile here of a Dre beat, of a G Funk a beat here. And it's the closest. There's not too many cracks here. Um, I dig this sound too. It fits, especially if I go back. As a first time listener right now, it's a little bit slow and aged, but if you go back, this fits perfectly. It has almost a Biggie sound to it too, but just the sound of the times inside of this. I dig reading, like you sent me that article, but going and diving and reading them talk about this song, it was cool to hear that, like, man, we just, really want to push that. We wish for love, like love from our father, mother, whoever it may be. But that's where we're at, and that's what we'll put out here. These are the inspiring parts of this album being created. For me, is just, some of the most gangster guys you got are like, yeah, but when it comes time for Christmas, we're the same as everybody else. We're wishing for a little love, and I dig that. I hope I don't sound contrived there, but I really do dig that coming from Death Row Records. And this song has it all. It has the bells and whistles. It has everything you come to expect from the sound, and delivers. So, are we looking at hip hop classic as far as our rhythm on the album now? We'll see. But it worked out well. It sort of made me forget the cracks that I saw in Danny Boy's Christmas song, and I'm back on board, so to speak, at this number 3 as we go forward.
Yeah, it works for what they're going for. I will say that. But we're going to go back to R&B with the next track, which is Silver Bells, another standard we actually haven't discussed on here before. It was written by Jay Livingston and Ray Evans. First recorded in 1950. I actually would have thought this song was way older than that, but apparently I was mistaken.
Uh,
The singer on this song is Michelle, who had a top 10 hit a few years prior with No More Lies. The production, we can say similar things on this track that we do for other of the smooth R&B songs here. However, I actually think Silver Bells lends itself to the smooth R&B treatment, and frankly, Michelle, she's got the sauce for the vocals. It's a smooth but strong voice. And yeah, she has the star power, frankly. Of the vocalists on this album, she's the only one who I think truly is able to get past the production faults. And that's saying something. This label definitely could have managed her better. I didn't really know about her until doing this album, and her Wikipedia page is fascinating. Just saying. What a life there. Yeah, I think this is a really good version of Silver Bells. It might be the best I've heard of the song. Not that it's one of my top Christmas songs ever, but I dig this version.
I'm on the other side, man. I think it's so misproduced. Yeah, she has some kind of star power. Her vocals on this are so unbalanced as far as production goes. I This song is put together poorly. It's really a black eye as far as first time listener through right now. Don't get me wrong, it has the propensity to be correctly done, and it's not far off as far as what she put down. But the way that this song is put together and presented as a full product is subpar at best. I mean, very, very pedestrian. And first time I really have been taken out of this album and be like, ugh. Um, I cringe going back and forth to this, even with that little experimental like breakdown at the end. It still is so crass. as far as the instrumentation and the way it's produced. Right. I guess to summarize it, my beef with this is really with the production. This track itself, where it tries to be strong in the soul R&B genre, it really fails. Oof, I haven't said that much negativity about a song in a hot minute, but not for me. Not this one.
And we're only on track 4. Oh boy. Yeah. Here's the thing. Let's no, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. Track 5, Peaceful Christmas, an original tune. Danny Boy wrote it with Kevin Lewis. He sings it. Very generic original tune. References other Christmas songs, but it's got the same kind of production that we've been hearing on the covers so far. And yeah, I feel really bad for the singer Danny Boy. I think he has a good voice. I think he has talent. I don't think he was being guided right on this label at this point in time. Not at all. Um yeah, they based on this, they just were not handling these R&B singers groups well. And this is the singer who I think had the most potential of them, who was new to it all. Michelle had recorded before and had a gold album. This is a young kid. He has talent, but they're just not managing it well here at all.
Whew, about to call me the Grinch up on this episode. This is the first one on the album that I'm convinced they laid the vocal tracks down without the backing track. Maybe a click track, maybe a rhythm track. There are points. Oh man, it's been just a really tough time this week because I keep going back through these songs and being like, that's not even in the same key. And this is one where you'll get pieces that the backing composition is not in the same key as the singer and not in an improvisational soul like feel. It's not maybe they're in and out on a solo. It's crazy, man. It feels like phoned in parts and somebody on GarageBand, or that wasn't even invented back then, but you know, your introductory software putting together a song. And if it's not that, then it's I can only think the only other reason would be egos, where people aren't even caring what's going on the track and just singing as many arpeggios as they can put in here to try to make this as soulful as it can. Um, there's a cool little message that goes through this. I will put a silver lining there. I will stick with the fact that I hope and have to believe that they believe in this music and we're really holding it to that level. But big time fail here. There's pieces where it is like a snap your fingers to it, move from left to right, but nothing near a full song here. It's starting to become clearly evident for me as a first time listener that this album is a hodgepodge or has the propensity to be a hodgepodge going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's showcased a bit by that. We're immediately on to another hip hop track, which this is Christmas in the Ghetto, performed by the trio OFTB, which stands for Operation from the Bottom. I like that they're going for a different kind of storytelling aspect here, something you might not hear a lot in Christmas tunes. Unfortunately, the execution just isn't there, and yeah, this trio, they just don't pop off like you need them to. Not like again, it's the star power. They just based on this, they don't have it. I don't know their other songs, but based on this, I'm not hearing the star power of even the Dog Pound, much less Snoop Dogg. It's just not here.
Yeah, the closest you get here is I mean, it's I shouldn't say cookie cutter, but it is. It's a cookie cutter West Coast vibe here. This could be used for a Grand Theft Auto loading screen for San Andreas. I mean, literally, and that's where, for me, the connection for a new generation of listener would immediately be on this song is they hear that Grand Theftness on it. They don't pop off, but these no no disrespect to OFTB, but these are your second tier rappers on this label. So there's maybe still working, or they're not going to reach that level as far as being prolific lyricists like Snoop Dogg. Um, I will say that I think they do a good job staying above a mediocre track, but not far from a mediocre track. There's some cool stuff going on here. Um, I You need to put Nate Dogg up on this track and let him sing the hook, because whoever sing the hook on this, I love this hook only because it's cheesy. Like Christmas in the ghetto, I dig that, but that's not what this song is meant to do. That's that parody that they're trying not to have, and this song barely rises above it. Not the worst on the album, but not my favorite so far.
No, not at all. But it is an original tune, and we gotta give them some credit for that one, because yeah, this hodgepodge thing, this back and forth, there's a lot of it's like classic original, and they're the transitions aren't as smooth as they could, because right after that we're on the Silent Night. This is done by three different vocal groups: BGOTI, 6 Feet Deep, and Gas. Couple extra S's at the end there. Okay. These people can sing. They can definitely sing. There are vocals on this rendition of Silent Night. But this is a TV show performance of Silent Night. This isn't great for a record. It's like they're trying to outdo each other, which is cool to watch on TV, maybe, but again, it's not really working on record. It goes on for a little bit. Um, and just again, these singers just are not supported by the production of this song. And this isn't a song that needs to be super fancy done, okay? But you can make an arrangement work, let the singers do their thing. But I don't need this battle singing all over this song. Yeah, what was their idea of it? I just wish whoever the producer, I just would have played. Hey, here's the Mariah Carey version of Silent Night. She does her thing with the vocals, but the production on it is very well done. They do little subtle things with the arrangement, and it's still recognizable, and we don't have to have all this trying to outdo each other. Just keep it simple, stupid. That's really what this is. This is just overblown, and it didn't need to be.
Yeah, you say TV show, I'm saying church basement or maybe even church mass. This is the show off of the year, and everybody's going to talk afterwards at the meal and celebration about who did the best. This is definitely overshadowed. There are some neat little parts here, especially the final harmony that they get towards the end all together, that are done well. But we run the gamut from flat notes, um, mishandled arpeggios, mishandled trills, to over embellished, just oversaturated show offness here. And you never really get a vibe. You never really settle on a vibe, minus that like harmony at the end. You rarely, you never really settle on a vibe here. And I'm 100% with you. This is a battle track of who can hit the highest note or do the most here, and it falters there. The production is okay. The composition is simple, but sometimes I get a little bit more on the simple compositions here. I am led to believe that this is a live drum track, but I am almost 100% positive. I'm so frustrated here. I'm almost 100% positive that this is a drum machine. And it is so, there are spots where it is so off that I need it to be a drum machine because any session drummer here could have knocked this out of the park. And it is far from that.
I think it's
Um,
a machine.
yeah, it's tough, man. It's tough. Silent Night, man. This is two in a row that our Silent Night has been janked up, so to speak. And this one had more of a propensity for greatness than Phil Spector's version, and it fell flat on its ass.
Yeah, it did. I mean, that wasn't a high bar to clear, the Spectre version. That was just for his own
Heard.
ego.
Exactly.
That was just for his
Exactly.
own ego. Yeah. But the next song is kind of ironically titled, considering I'm not feeling this way listening to this album a ton. The next song is Be Thankful. This is an original tune from Nate Dogg. Okay, Star Power, King of Hooks here singing. No, he doesn't pop like he should here. This is just him. He works obviously very well in contrast with the rappers and adds to their songs, but in this case, yeah, again, very boring production here. It's done by yeah, it was produced by Sean Barney Thomas, but you can't even really tell it's a different producer doing this song, I don't think. I mean, in that case, I guess it's cohesive, but yeah, this song's just not playing to Nate Dogg's strengths, and the production is not elevating his voice like it should. I'm not familiar with Nate Dogg's solo work, but based on this, he's better featured than solo. This isn't a ringing endorsement for him.
I got to take a deep breath before this one.
Oh no.
I'm going to preface this by saying, and even if you're a longtime listener, I don't think you ever get a dabble of how much I enjoy Nate Dogg and how much I enjoy his suaveness, how much I enjoy his way that he attacks his hooks. There is a pimp gangsterness to what he does and what he has done, and I love that. I am a sucker for it, and I love it. I wish, oh man, I can't believe I'm going to say this. I wish I'd never have heard this song because it's so, oh man, I'm trying not to curse while I say this. It's so gosh darn contrived. It's so gosh darn one note, which is not who he is. It's so, oh, I'm getting loud. It's so low register or like mid register. It gives him no place to have fun on. And it's flat. It's so flat. It's so flat. There's parts in this song where you could blind listen. I would think, I'm going to say this, you could blind listen people and ask them, is this Afro Man or is this Nate Dogg? And you probably have a 50-50 split. There's spots in this that I could cut out and convince you that Afro Man is doing a new Christmas song. That's how, and I'm not shitting on Afro Man, but that's not what I have ever come to expect from Nate Dogg. And it's tough. I'm not saying he's a virtuoso, but it's wild that this was even released. Especially if I stay on the thought, and I will stay on the thought that they were holding this to a higher level, to a high regard as far as a successful Christmas album here. Maybe at the very end he gets his a chance to really have some fun and hit a higher register and play around, but that's the only salvageable piece. It's not even an end, it's like in the middle. I'm gonna stop there. It's definitely, I don't need any West Side Gun to my head on this. And this is my least favorite on the whole entire album, and more so for my love of Nate Dogg. I'm gonna stop there before I keep ranting on.
I mean, yeah, you have a higher standard when you see who's coming on the song. It's one of the heavy hitters, one of the names you recognize. So you have that. expectation, like, okay, this will maybe be best song on the album, and then you hear it and you're just let down. I think that's a big part of why this feels like such a letdown, because you don't have the history with the
Right.
other singers here like you do Nate Dogg. Like these other people didn't do regulate. That's really
Heard exactly.
that's where we're at here. And one of those singers who you may not be familiar with, this is a group doing an original song. We're at the midway point now. Track 9 on this glorious day. This was performed by 816. My notes on this song read boring and long. That's all I have to say about it.
Yeah, there's some really cool vocal harmonies here, and there's some very cool vocal ideas here. The track on this is whack as the day is long, and it makes it boring, and there's no editing. Um, it's why we end up with a 5 minute and 44-second track here on Oh Holy Night. There really is some great ideas here, and I really wish there would have been some editing here because I feel like you had a really cool thought process from the artists. Um, I said "Oh Holy Night." I meant on this glorious day, but you had some really cool thought processes from the artists, and I think you could have ran with it and made something really awesome here. And unfortunately, it becomes boring, like you said, and it becomes way too long.
Yeah, we're getting into some vocal groups here, and I just feel so sorry for the vocal groups on this album. They just were not being guided correctly at all, and that's just the beginning of it. And we have another example with our friends from Silent Night, 6 Feet Deep, who did Frosty the Snowman. Yeah, this is an example where week before we covered one of the best version of this particular song, Ronettes. Now we have this lame ass version of it. Oh my God. We talked about the church basement earlier. This is church basement boys to men. That's what this is. I can tell that's what they're going for. And of course, you want to go for boys to men. And you know what? Their songs weren't always the most exciting in the world. They were very smooth with their ballads. Okay, I understand that, but you know what? This really makes you appreciate them because this production is such a letdown. And I just feel bad for these kids. I mean, I'm hearing these groups singing. I'm thinking these are young kids that probably were heard somewhere. They can sing, but they're not being built and developed into artists. And they're definitely not getting a chance with this putrid arrangement of Frosty the Snowman. It stays in the same place the whole time. I think it's the worst version I've ever heard of this song, and I hate it. Ugh.
Using the word hate. No,
Well,
it definitely isn't a good Frosty. I'll tell you what, the intro to this, and I've listened to this intro probably like 100 times this week. The intro to this song, if they could have held and made the rest of the song stick with this intro, they could have had it. But they take this beautiful intro and then cut the tempo in half with the lyrics, and it falls flat in the snow. It is gone. There is no Frosty. It is so slow. By the time you get to thumpity thump thump, it's almost a different song because of how slow it is. It loses all of its narrative qualities inside of the original because of how slow it was taken. And it's one note. Yeah, they have a great harmony. uh it's a terrible composition. Yeah, I don't want to sit here and shit all over every song. So I'm gonna leave it there, but there's 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 no life here. That had no magic when they placed it on top of this song, and you got Frosty the No Man here.
yep.
In my opinion. Nope, sorry. Man,
And
it seemed like
now
such a great idea on paper. And we're here at track 10. And it's like, ugh, come on, guys.
It really did. And now we're gonna see them potentially at the rate we're going, they're potentially gonna massacre another Christmas classic, this one being Oh Holy Night. And this was done by BGOTI, who were the ladies that we heard singing on Silent Night earlier. Now, the woman they had singing, I don't know the names of these ladies. I'm very sorry. There's not a ton of info about this group out there. She put on whole ass whistle notes on Silent Night, again, because it was the church basement. They're trying to outdo each other. And they don't do it here. They're not showcasing, I guess they don't have as much to prove. They're not battling against the boys or whatever. So they're not doing all that here. And we once again have a boring arrangement. This is just the most generic R&B that you can think of. And maybe this label wanted to venture into other genres, and good for them, but you're not trying to develop these groups. And I just come away from this feeling sorry for the artists because I have no doubt that these people really wanted to sing and get a great opportunity, but they're just no, they're made into nobodies doing these songs. I don't get a sense of who they are. And these artists, I'm not surprised to know they weren't on Death Row Records for long based on what they're giving them, the guidance. I just feel sorry for them after hearing this. Labels should be guiding their artists, and that's not happening here. And this is another disappointing version of a Christmas Carol.
I'm gonna go flip on this, not 100% flip, because don't get me wrong, this isn't a classic. I mean, this song is a classic, but this isn't necessarily a classic version of it. There are some really, I know I've said it a bunch, but on this one, they're more cohesive. There's some really awesome ideas here. This is another track from me, and it shows, in my opinion, the mismanagement of these R&B artists, like you were saying on this label. But there's some really cool areas here that, with the correct editing and maybe a tad bit, I'm not taking anything away from the artists here, but maybe a tad bit higher level vocalist, there was a really good version of Oh Holy Night here. And even the way it's set down is not terrible to me. It's more I for this one, I'm going to take it out and listen to it by itself as a excuse me, as like a really light R&B Christmas, and I enjoy it. I enjoy it. I don't hate it, but golly gosh, if there was a producer or just a little bit more thought into the production of this rather than let it all hang out. We get some really long tracks here, and this is another one that comes in at the 442. That editing could have made this so much better. I really do. This is one I'll die on this hill. This is one of the ones that I'll fight for on this album, as far as they were very close to hitting it out of the park.
I can see where you're coming from, and these are very talented singers. I don't want to take anything away from them. I just think that the label and the producers are letting them down. But fortunately, we are going to change things up a little bit with the next track, which is Party for the Homies, which was performed and written by Sean Barney Thomas. I hope he redeems himself a bit here after the last song he produced, because he let down Nate Dogg. Um, I mean, it's a bit of a burst of energy after the previous few songs. I will definitely give it that. It's a bit of a relief after we just went into the smooth, generic R&B that, honestly, if it were produced today, people would be saying those beats were AI generated. That's what I think they'd be saying. I don't think that's quite the case here. Do I think this song pops out just in the grand scheme of things, outside of this album? If I were to hear this on a Christmas playlist, I would be bored. But for this album, it's a breath of fresh air. That's what I'll
Yep,
say.
straight out of my notes. Straight out of my notes on that one. energy well needed. And that's exactly what this was. For inside of this album, it has enough energy and enough cohesiveness that it sticks out as one of the stronger songs here. It's fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it really lets us in from a narrative perspective in the window of this party for the homies. And it does its job. It does its job. It's up there on the long scale, and it doesn't necessarily drag as much as the other ones do. It does its job here. I give it to them on this one. They at least raised the the energy here and brought me back to the album, because we hit a doldrum there for a minute. That the middle of this album is really really tough. So congrats to track 12 for bringing us back. But yeah, like you said, outside of this album on a playlist, eh, filler. Oof. I try not to use that word this podcast, but it would be filler on a Christmas classics playlist for a dinner party or something.
Yes. But for this album, it's a fantastic, actually, by the stairs. But hopefully we can bring things up now that we're into the last quarter of the album, which begins with White Christmas, performed by Gas, another R&B group. You know what? They do some new things with the vocal melodies here. I do appreciate them making those their own. Let down by the production once again. The good news is this isn't a really long cover, so at least it's kind of one and done to an extent. Like, we don't spend too much time on it, so I can't really get mad at it. But again, just generic production. And once again, Kevin Thomas is no baby face.
Yeah. I This one I'm giving flowers to. The production is crass and too bright in my opinion, but they really gave the vocalists here, guests really gave their own to this, and they really gave their heart to this, and you can feel it. It feels whole. And nitpicking on the production on this one for me. This is a solid White Christmas. This is a cool White Christmas, and we've listened to a lot of White Christmases, so it's neat. This one is a breath of fresh air in the covering of this song, and also for this album. It's a very strong point as far as the vocal stylings throughout this album.
I completely agree. It definitely shows some originality in that regard. And it's kind of now just a victory lap for the vocalists at this point, so to speak, because we're going back to the beginning now with track 14. Danny Boy appears to do his version of This Christmas, a song we actually haven't discussed yet, but a Donny Hathaway standard. He wrote this back in 1970, and it's been covered a bunch of times since then. Have to take a deep breath before this one. So Donny Hathaway's This Christmas, outside of being a Christmas song, just take that out of it. It's a soul classic. We're going to take that and make it this, again, back to the generic, smooth 90s R&B here. The most generic it can be that we've been hearing on this album. We're going to take it to that. And most versions of this song are done with that original arrangement as Hathaway wrote it. And there's a reason for that. It's because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Here they try to fix it. And I appreciate that we tried to do something new. This was not the song to do something new with. The other carols ask for a few more liberties to be taken with their arrangements. This one just, I don't think does, and I'm not saying that you couldn't, but this is not the way in which to do it. And yeah, this is the worst version I've ever heard of This Christmas, and I'm going to say it's my least favorite on the album because I actually really love this song. I love a lot of versions of it, and I find this version of it offensive. I'll say that.
I don't know if I have necessarily hit the offensive mark here, but I feel like there's a little bit of like, hey, you ever heard Stevie Wonder do this? Or like, you ever heard just they threw out a famous name and they were like, hey, try to do it just like that. And I feel like the artist tried to elevate it above that rather than just focusing on their strengths inside of this song. And it's it's just mediocre, man. It's why do it if you're not going to do it? Especially if you come off guest doing White Christmas, and in my opinion, doing it their own way and really covering it well. This just feels like another okay. Let's record it. Ready, go. For me, even with the the trills inside of it, I give a shout to the horns or the production on the horn pieces here. That they're cool. But yeah, it doesn't stand up well with any other versions, and on its own is unfortunately mediocre.
Yeah. That it is. That it is. A mediocre version of a great song. But we're now getting towards the end, and now we're back. We're on the penultimate track now, which is Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. 6 feet deep do this one. It's better than their version of Frosty. I'll give it that. I mean, you know what? It's fine. I'll take it. It's just I'm kind of ready for this album to be over. It's the point I'm at when listening to this. I'm like, you know what? It's fine. Let's just finish this, please.
It's very tough not to be on a bunch of listens, especially as many as we do, but period, like at this point in the album you're listening through, it's tough not to be. 6 feet deep again, man. They have a way about their vocal stylings, and there's really some creative harmonies and okay thoughts here, but they are far off on this one. This for me, like even if I'm waiting for this album to be over, and as much as I try to give them credit for these playful and really creative thoughts, this is so far off, man. There's parts in this where, again, I go back to like, it's not even on key, not even on the wildest jazz improvisational thought processes. It just, there's parts here that aren't on with the song. Um, the spoken is whack. I guess it's trying to make its own there, but it doesn't play for me. I saying this is better than their Frosty is tough for me too, man. This is a classic. This is your penultimate track too. This is the one to bring them back in before we let them go with something beautiful as a finale. And this is one way too experimental to be this penultimate track, but just this is a failure, man. This is a failure for me as a cover of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas.
I I mean, I don't disagree with you. Just oh, but now we're at the end of it, finally, with Christmas Every Day. This song written by one Smokey Robinson, and this song has a little funk to it, which is a relief on this album because so much of it is just feels like a bit of a dirge. Uh, I mean, I appreciate the funk of it. It's definitely not what it needs to be and what this label could have done, or what Motown could have done for that matter. I, I'm gonna say this now when it comes to these boys and Gas, who I think are very good singers, but I just think it's very funny that Death Row Records said they could be the Motown of the 90s, and yet Motown in the 90s had better artist development with Boys to Men, who were their top artists of that era. And we have these people who you're trying to make into that, I guess, in the realm of this album, but they don't get there. And I just feel bad for them because, yeah, I don't know. These are good singers. They don't get to do as much to make it their own as I think they did on White Christmas. But again, just very generic and overall, just it doesn't really take it from the church singing with these groups from that to the recording studio. They just don't get that care that they need for that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Guess has had some of the strongest outings here as far as the album goes. So why not finish off with them? And when I saw it after what they did with White Christmas, I was like, all right, here we go. Um, shout out to Suge Knight. The track has a shout out to Suge Knight in the beginning. It's a smoky track. This one should be able to take it home and finish this off on a top notch note. And I would have rather White Christmas be here, in all honesty, because I think it's such a better outing for them and for this album. Um, the Motown comment, like I said before, is delusions of grandeur, and unfortunately, we don't get anything really above that here. It's I keep using the word mediocre, but it's a mediocre note to end this one with. Um, yeah, it's tough, man. That was the end of this album.
Yeah. End of this album. Uh, all right, what's your grade for the album? Let's just cut to the chase here.
Christmas on death row by everybody at death row except the people you wanted on it. No, um,
Yeah.
it is a noble undertaking. Unfortunately, and I really do. I keep going back to that. It's a noble undertaking that I think really for these artists had a real reason to do. I don't think this was just something they did for shits and giggles, but the production, in my opinion, is woefully mismanaged throughout. The pacing started off where we were getting hip hop mixed in with R&B, but by the middle of this album, almost all the way to the end, we are stuck in this light R&B doldrum with subpar outings by everybody here on that respect. There are a few shining gems um, in the rubble here, but not anything that's going to make its way onto your list. Other than for me, Santa Claus goes straight to the ghetto, but only because it has just this nostalgic piece to it. Um, Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to give this one a D.
You read my mind. This is a D. Ah, I mean, it's pretty sad. You should, when you hear a Christmas album, you should want to feel joy listening to it. This one, I just felt pity for everybody involved. Honestly, I just don't think everybody was guided right. And some people probably should have known better, but most of these folks just, for the artists, that is, most of them just did not. I think these were young kids new to Death Row Records and they weren't taught right. And this is just, ugh, yeah, not a diamond in the rough like I was hoping for
Yeah,
overall.
I'll sandwich this by saying again, this house was in disarray. And unfortunately, we don't have Dre here, which I can only take by everything that he's done throughout his career that we would have at least got a B out of this album if Dre was on top of it. Um, and more from Snoop. Again, I made the joke there. Various artists, all the artists on Death Row that you didn't know, or you did, that were on this album. You don't get enough of the ones you did know, but it shows in the historical timeline of Death Row Records. This was pretty much the end of it.
Yeah, beginning of the end of the label, quite literally.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's when it comes to the R&B tracks, like I love some R&B. I love some there's some great 90s R&B. We've discussed some of it on this show. There were better ways to do this. You could have done that smooth R&B sound. I don't know if Death Row could have gotten the best producers for that sound, but I don't think that who they had even tried to get to that. Like there was something that you could have aimed for and they just didn't do it. Or maybe
yeah,
they just aimed and failed.
yeah. For me, I think that's what it is because I again think the aim was true here, and I don't know, and I tried to find again. We say the lack of cult following, but like I wonder if some of these tracks are cherished in different circles, and I'd love to hear if you have different opinions. Throw them down in the comments, and I love to have my mind opened in those aspects. But I just feel like that true arrow did not go anywhere near the mark.
No, unfortunately not. Well, you already said your favorite was, I'm guessing, Santa Claus Goes Straight to the Ghetto.
Straight to the ghetto.
I mean, it's an easy contender. I actually liked Silver Bells though, kinda. So I'm going to say that was my favorite. We didn't agree with that, but we are in agreement on the album. So,
Yeah, indeed.
well, thank you for listening at least. Thank you for taking this journey with us. If you want to follow us, please do so. That would be much appreciated. And it's crazy. We are almost at the end of this year, which means it's time for our annual tradition of doing an album released in 2024 that we missed. We did it last year. We're going to do it again. We did quite a few albums this year, but always so much coming out that you can't get to it all. So what we did was put up a poll for you to choose from some albums released that I'm tripping over my words. Let me start over.
You're good.
So just like last year, we put up a poll for you all to decide what you wanted to hear us discuss to close the year out. Variety of options. We got some different genres in there. Yes, so we gave you some options. The options were releases from Keller Williams, NGMT, The Cure, and Halsey. And it wasn't our most active poll that we've had. Not as much engagement as some previous ones, but that's okay. We did still have a clear winner. And that winner was Halsey and her album, The Great Impersonator. So
That's the first time listen for me. How about you?
I know one song on it because she did it on the VMAs, and it was a song that I enjoy. So, and this is a concept album, and it has a really interesting backstory to it from what I have read about it, and it had a neat promotional campaign for it. So I am curious to dive into this one. It was one that came up. I didn't listen to it all immediately, even though I was curious to. So I'm glad that we're going to be diving into it. I will say that. And there's something based on the title, I'm guessing, as you might assume, filled with a lot of homages to musical friends of Turntables and Tea, which I'm very happy about. Gives us an excuse to dive into some other favorites of ours a bit because they inspired Halsey to make these songs and this album. And just shows you that cycle. So I'm really looking forward to hearing how these impersonations are channeled, and I think it'll be a good way to end the year for us.
Yeah, super excited about it. And the year is so crazy, but
I
we're there.
I know, crazy year all around, but it's got to come to an end, and we've got more spinning and spilling for you in 2025, but not before we end it out with some great impersonations. Until then, stay safe, happy holidays, and we will be impersonating with you soon.
Ho, ho, ho!